What are some of your values? Things you hold dear in life.
I'd just say loyalty. I don't think loyalty exists in a lot, just generally speaking.
That loyalty doesn't exist in that generation or across the whole workforce, are you saying?
Younger generation.
Yeah, in younger generation, it's we're going to get into that because you're absolutely right.
But then again, from an executive level, that doesn't exist either, too.
CEOs are bouncing around now too. Absolutely, absolutely. You bring up a great point.
And numbers rule it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's easier to fire someone and make your numbers look good.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. What did your traditional bosses tell you? Because that baby boomers earlier in your career, if not currently, your bosses were probably from the traditional generation. What did they tell you about your career? Put your time in, and then you'll get the rewards, right? Didn't they tell you that? So what have you done over the last 20 or 30 years? You put your time in, right? So what time is it? It's time for you to get yours, right? That's what baby boomers are thinking. Baby boomers are thinking, hey, you know, it's time. I put in that 20 years you told me to put in. Now, where's my title? Where's my BMW, my Mercedes, my company car? You know, where's my 6 weeks of vacation plus access to the corporate jet? It'd be nice, right? Let's take a deeper look at the baby boomers. Baby boomers define consumerism today. You may think Generation Y is driving that consumerism, and they may be. They're a force to be reckoned with that we'll get into. But name brands came or sort of derived from the baby boomer generation. You remember how the hippies changed to yuppies, right? Some of you want to forget that. You're like, oh no, not the hippies and the yuppies. Some of you can't remember because you were a hippie and you took too many influencers to remember that time. But consumerism boomed with that generation, okay? They became a generation of status, of name brand. Their value in life was determined by what you saw. The BMW in the driveway, the 3,000 square foot home, 2.5 kids, you know, and when you walk in, I've got the finest wine to show you. Okay? That defined that generation. They were an optimistic generation and extremely competitive. And naturally, because they were such a huge population that they had to fight for what was out there. Okay? So they became extremely competitive, adaptable. For that generation, now we're seeing higher levels of adaptability with some of the younger generations, but definitely more adaptable than the traditional generation. They became change agents, stellar careers, because they had the loyalty of the traditional generation where you've probably stayed with a job for 10, 15 years at this point, and you've been putting your time in and showing your dedication to that job. Money, title, and recognition are really important to the baby boomer. They're important to everybody, but realize too that generation, it was an essential tool. And that's why you go into a bank today and you see VP titles everywhere. And I walked into Bank of America the other day and I look at a teller and it's VP of tellers. Okay, nah, I'm just kidding, they didn't do that. Okay, but the banks have a tendency to give everybody a VP title instead of the money. And FaceTime is important to them. Now let's take a trip to the next generation. The next generation would be Generation X. Okay, Generation X, the smallest of all four generations, oftentimes a forgotten generation. Everybody at once say, "Aw, aw, yeah, we're forgotten sometimes." We're getting lost in, I say we because I'm a Gen Xer, we're getting lost between the noise of the baby boomers. That's a large population, I believe it's 72 million or 70 million strong. Okay, the Gen X is about 30 million, and I'll get those stats for you specifically, those numbers. I don't remember them exactly. And then we've got the Generation Y, that's the largest generation of all, 92 million. 92 million, okay? It's a scary number when you think of it. Okay, so let's take a look at Generation X. Became a skeptical generation, and you remember, some of you probably remember this, the term the latchkey kid. Remember that? That term derived from kids that were being left at home, Generation X. They were being left home because their parents, dual incomes, parents were working, and baby boomers invented the 16-hour workday because their parents weren't doing 16 hours. That was a baby boomer invention. And they would come home and the kids would have to manage themselves, right? The Gen X kids. Unlike their little brothers and little sisters, Gen Y, who are actually overmanaged at this point. So it's like almost like there was a compensation period where, oh, we've neglected Generation X, so now we have to compensate with Generation Y and we have to overbook them, overschedule them. But that's where their skepticism came from for this generation. Also, the economy took a turn for the worse when this generation was growing up. Their parents, who were putting in 10, 15 years on the job and working 16-hour workdays, suddenly were at home because they got laid off. Okay, so the Generation X looked at business and said, you're not going to do that to me. I'm not going to let you do to me what you did to my parents. And we started to see this huge boom of innovation coming out of that generation. You saw the Googles being created, the Yahoos being created by Generation X, all these huge Silicon Valley companies being created by Generation X. The challenge we had was that we didn't know how to manage them. And we had the dot-com bust at that particular point in the 2000s, I think it was. Okay. Portable careers. Generation X, if you look at their resumes, our resumes, you'll see no more than 5 years in any particular job. 3 to 5 years. After 3 to 5 years, something happens in our brains and we feel we have to move on. Okay? And we do. Tech-savvy generation, often forgotten. We're looking at Generation Y and saying Generation Y is like so tech-savvy, but Generation X is as tech-savvy as Generation Y. And when you think about the contributions to technology, most of what Generation Y is using today actually came from Generation X. Generation Y is being very innovative in how they're using it, though. So that's Generation X.